Hey everyone, thank you for joining the CV Dot Strategy panel. My name is Gregory Skinner, VP of Auto and Mobility here at Escalent, and super excited to have an outstanding group of people to talk today about what's going on in the work truck space. I'm going to let them introduce yourselves. Maybe I should introduce myself first. So I work at Escalent, which is a advisory and analytics firm. It sounds all fancy, but fundamentally we're research. We do data analytics. We do qualitative analysis, which is sort of my domain, where I'm out talking to people on the ground to get real perspectives on things that are happening in the marketplace. And then we work with our clients to guide them through the commercial vehicle space. Our clients include OEMs, tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, telematics suppliers, you name it, and we've sort of been involved with it. So really great view of the market, and hopefully that gives me some great perspective to guide our group through our conversation today. Just passing it over, let's have Christina introduce herself, please.
Thank you. Christina Ameigh, I'm the Vice President of Truck Sales for the Lion Electric. We are a Class 5 through 8 commercial vehicle manufacturer of purpose-built electric vehicles in the US and Canada. I've been in this space in the electric vehicle space for about 5 years, about 25 years in commercial vehicles total. So happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Jill, can I have you talk about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, my name is Jill Trotta. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. I started out actually turning a wrench and have worked my way up. I'm currently the principal consultant for 5801 Consultants, and we do a lot of projects in the aftermarket, particularly around data and valuation of data of sets.
Oh, perfect. So your hands are still dirty? Is that what you're saying? Still got grease on your hands?
No, not anymore. I like to keep cars that are under warranty.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jill. And Sidney Miller.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sidney Miller. I do fleet sales at Midway Ford Truck Center in Kansas City, Missouri. We specialize in supplying commercial fleets, small and large, across the country. So glad to be here.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're super excited to talk today about this idea of connecting the dots, because our panel is very diverse. Like, we've got a lot of different perspectives on what's going on from both the client perspective and from, let's say, the supply or vendor perspective. If anybody in the audience remembers, and you should, this morning Catherine threw up that diagram. We're calling it that sort of ecosystem diagram with work truck in the middle, and then it's got all those dots around the perimeter, which include auctions, warranties, outfits, accessories, data, and so much more. I'm going to throw it out to the group and see what your perspective is from your specific area of expertise. When we talk about connecting the dots, which dots do you think are most relevant to your space, and which do you see sort of percolating the most? Let me throw it out to Christina first.
Yeah, there's a lot of dots that really have been shifting in the commercial vehicle industry, and a couple things that come to mind are residual value, insurance, and financing. Those are probably in the electric vehicle, commercial vehicle space, probably the three biggest challenges that we have to overcome. It's a fairly new market if you look at the commercial vehicle industry as a whole, and not everyone has come along as quickly as the OEMs have. So trying to bring that whole ecosystem together to put a deal together for a customer can be really, really challenging. So it requires a ton of hand-holding, not just between the customer and the OEM, or the customer and the dealer, but to hold the hand of finance partners, insurance partners, and then the whole remarketing side of the business.
Amazing. Because nobody ever talks about it. You're the very first person I've heard to talk about this, is this idea of insurance. We always talk about infrastructure, when we talk about different chassis types, and etc. Nobody ever talks about insurance. Why do you think that is? Is it just like we haven't gotten that far, or what is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, to be honest, we should be talking about insurance in the same breath as talking about financing, because, in traditional, that's typically done last, right? When you're going through a truck deal is, oh, I just need to add it to my policy. But the reality is that traditional insurance companies haven't come along enough to be able to have that as an easy fit with their portfolio. So it requires new partners, right? So that needs to be, instead of having it on the back end of the conversation when you're putting the vehicle into service, it needs to be at the front end of the conversation, because it can take a while to find the right partner that's willing to take that level of risk with new technology.
Makes your job that much more difficult.
It's just one of the many things that makes the job difficult. Anytime you are introducing new technology, there's always going to be that some new hurdles. But we're seeing hurdles that we haven't experienced in the industry today over the past 5 years, and it's challenging, really.
Right. Sidney, I'm going to ask you, just because we can sort of juxtapose, a more traditional sort of vehicle with the area where Christina lives. Can you talk a little bit about the dots that you see going on in your space?
So in my space on the dealership level, Midway's a little different from a lot of the other dealers, just because we see the whole life cycle of the vehicle as our responsibility. It doesn't just stop when we sell the vehicle. So we deal with the ordering of the vehicle, ordering equipment, the upfitting of the vehicle, and then the final delivery of the vehicle. And then beyond that, we also, now Ford is focusing on supplying telematics, tracking all of that stuff. And then also we specialize in helping our customers with service, parts, the kind of the full circle. And then at the end of that life cycle of the vehicle, we will also assist them in reselling the vehicle. So, it's the whole life cycle. We don't see it as, we punch the sale, we're done. So that's where we're a little different.
Yeah. So it's very much like you're a partner. And I talked about this in my presentation yesterday, where, what we see in the marketplace with all the consolidation that's happening with big business trying to sort of wedge their way into this new space, that the need for partnerships is so essential. Would you consider your role more as a partner or as a consultant even?
Yeah, we definitely see all of our customers as partners, and we value the relationship, and we don't act in what's best for us. We want to work for what's best for their company and the application of the vehicle within their company. So that's, the partnership, it goes both ways, and it needs to be, mutually, needs to work for both parties.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Jill, what is it that you see happening? What are the dots that exist in your space?
So I think in terms of supply chain and predictive repair that are going to be needed on this vehicle, collecting all of the data from all the different companies and using that to make really good predictions about how many vehicles Lion's going to need to manufacture based on historicals, and how many vehicles Ford's going to have to deliver, and at what point are certain parts on that vehicle going to fail, and then to be able to use that information to be able to manufacture the right amount of parts, so you're not over or under predicting. Because in the previous years, we've had lots of supply chain issues and vehicles just parked because of it. So I feel like the big opportunity to connect the dots is using that data to be able to more reliably predict servicing and parts and all the different things that go along with owning the vehicles.
Yeah. There've been no supply chain issues. I click the Amazon button, stuff shows up in 8 hours.
Right.
Well, it just takes one part too to hold up a whole vehicle. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sitting here with a broken dishwasher for 3 weeks.
yeah.
So one thing I want to throw out to the audience, so everybody watching, just because I forgot to mention it up front, is feel free to throw any questions, even comments in the chat, and we'll address them as we go along. And then in addition to that, I'm going to ask the audience some questions to see what it is that you're doing on your end. And as a group, we might be able to discuss or address some of those things too. So the next thing I have for the group, and I'll just open this up at this point, so feel free to chime in or put in your 2 cents, is one of the things that we've seen traditionally, again, if you think back to that ecosystem diagram, is this market is very sort of siloed and independent. So although all the elements coexist, so if I go rentals, maintenance, finance, insurance, if you're a fleet manager or a fleet owner, you can get all of those things, but they're not interdependent. They don't depend on each other. But in this new market space, I feel like things are going to sort of coalesce. Like we're going to see more partnerships and collaborations happening. So those dots are going to start to shift and merge. As a group, what do you think? Like, where do you think these natural bonds are going to happen as the market continues to evolve?
Wow, that's a great question, and I think one that we're really seeing that play out in real time, right? So if you look at, and just take for example the powertrain, right? And how that's shifting. So you have new technologies on the combustion side, and then the vehicle side, and you've got all these collaborations that are occurring across, with the batteries, and if it's hydrogen or a fuel cell. And then you also have these manufacturers that are making e-axles. It requires this unique collaboration that we haven't had to see in the past, because vehicles, even though we've seen a lot of emissions changes over the years, they've really stayed sort of similar. You've had this evolution of technology over time. Today, because the technology is so new, now you have different suppliers that are really having to adapt the tech are really mature and adapt them to a completely different type of system. And so, there's a lot of challenges with that in the industry as a whole, just from where we've had a good amount of reliability over the past decade or so, that we're starting to see some past cars, for example, where you have true vertical integration. In the commercial vehicle side of the business, you see a lot more collaboration that's needed. So a lot of different suppliers. You'll see a lot of different types of technologies hanging off the vehicle, and they all have to really work together really, really well. So we see a ton of collaboration on the engineering side, for sure.
Yeah. Others, do you have any thoughts on that? Oh, sorry, Sidney, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we're also going to see a lot more collaborations with telematics and software companies among all these OEMs. We see like the Fleetio and the Ford coming together for their telematics, and it's not just a truck anymore. It's now a piece of software. It has all this data it can provide. We learned back during COVID when there was a chip shortage that everything now has a chip. It's not just all like mechanical. It's now there's a lot of software ingrained in these vehicles.
And I think just the collaboration is the big, especially when you're talking about sharing data so that everybody benefits from all of the insights that are being gathered in all the different spaces. And that'll be able to help the industry to move forward strongly.
Yeah, it's interesting how everything that we've talked about in that one point is very tech focused. Whether we're talking new pieces of technology hanging off the vehicle or the data sharing and data integration. From knowing that our audience has a good number of dealers and upfitters and dealing with small fleets as well as large, what do you think they have to think about? Like, where do they have to sort of dial up their awareness and knowledge to deal with these new sorts of partnerships and bonds?
I think, if I look at it through the eyes of an upfitter, for example, that we're seeing a big shift in the upfitter market where it's getting a lot more technical, for example. So, the the technology that it takes, and I'll use let's just use a dump truck application, for example. To do a true electric dump truck takes a ton of new technology, right? So an upfitter has to, I was talking, for example, to a large body company that's well known in the US. And they were telling me that one of the changes that they've made is that every time they move that electric vehicle, they have to stop their whole production line, shut it down, make the move, start it back up. So how does that change your business? That's different. What are the changes that they need to make to accommodate? And then also, because there is this shift in the industry moving from ICE vehicles to EVs, you have to make that transition slowly. So how does that impact their business, and how do they ramp that production up also that's in line with the industry?
Yeah, and I love that point, Christina, because when we go and we talk to these different companies, or whether talking to fleet managers, I think that's the one thing that everybody forgets is we sort of feel like it's going to be a one-for-one swap. Like, okay, I'm bringing in a new EV based truck, and I'm just going to replace the old one with it. But you really have to change the way that you do business. Like everything about that changes all of a sudden. And it's not so simple.
Absolutely.
Do you see that happening, Sidney? Do you like with your customers? Do you hear them talking about those sorts of challenges or hurdles?
Yeah, so we see a bunch of people, there's some fleets that have really adopted all the technology, all of, the increased safety features, everything like that. Some people are really, invested and are excited to have that data. And then we see, our smaller fleets, or, your average HVAC guy, he doesn't need all those bells and whistles. He doesn't need all that technology. He just wants a work truck that's reliable, that he can get to, the field every day. Because if it's down, then he can't go to work. So I see both sides of it. But it is interesting.
I don't know if you would see that at all, Jill. Does that sort of thing pop in the data? Like when it comes to, let's say, production cycles, manufacturing, how do you account for those sorts of challenges at the field level?
Huh. I'm not sure.
Did I
Yeah,
just
I'm
say
not really sure how to answer that. I was sitting here thinking about that, like how it all kind of fits in.
Mhm.
But you're always going to have your smaller companies who are going to be the outliers. But what I'm seeing is a lot of the bigger companies, they're not set up for the level of data analytics that they need to have internally to make the right decisions. So sharing and going forward, like that's really important to be able to predict all the things that we're discussing on this panel: supply chains and what trucks and how many of certain trucks are out there, what technology is on different trucks. I recently was involved with a project that it was in the RV space and cataloging what's on the vehicles, because that's a big when you have different companies and all the collaborations going on, what happens on the vehicle when all those merge, and how is that managed?
Right. As all of you are bringing up an interesting point, which is because of the complexity of the sorts of things that we're talking about supplying to the market, that it's going to be difficult for the market to interpret these things as well as use them. Do you think it's incumbent upon the manufacturers and the dealers and all of us who are here on this, who basically help bring this to market, is it incumbent upon us to make it simpler for the end user, or is it their responsibility to also sort of gear up and be able to deal with a new way of business and a new way of doing things?
Yeah, that's great. It's another really great question with probably not a simple answer. But I think it's in my view, it takes the whole ecosystem, and I don't just mean manufacturer, customer, suppliers, at the highest level of government, right? Because there's a lot of using you both sit in California, for example, and the adoption rate with EVs in California isn't where anybody wants it to be, right? And I think what makes it more complex is that the regulations can be confusing. And if I'm, for example, a small fleet or an owner operator, I don't understand all of the regulations. So how do you boil it down so that it's easy for a little guy to understand that doesn't have, a legal team sitting behind him to interpret those regulations? So I think that it needs to, it is sort of a top-down approach that has to happen from the top down to the consumer, and how do we sort of all work together and collaborate to ultimately help that customer understand what they need to do, the timing for how they need to do it, and what are the steps that they need to take as a customer, and sort of hold their hand through that process.
Right.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, I think the more we know, the better, just so we can best help our customers. And it seems to me like it's kind of ever evolving. The rules are kind of changing. There's no concrete list of what to do. And that's where it gets really confusing for the customers.
Let me throw that out to the audience. If you have any thoughts on this, throw it in the chat, sorts of things that you feel that you need to be successful. And then how much help or how much assistance do you need from, let's say, the OEM or the dealer or the vendor to help you do that? I'd be really interested to see what people think need to be done. Now, part of the reason I'm asking this is because in some of the conversations that I've had with, again, sort of fleet managers and transportation managers, their point of view is, we're not really asking for a lot of this stuff that's coming to market. Everything's working perfectly fine. It's you guys who are changing it. So why is it that we have to spend all this time, money, and resources to ramp up to do this? Like it should be you guys helping us. So that's sort of where that question is coming from. Now,
Can I just add something? Would it be okay if I
Yeah.
just added one thing that came to mind as you were talking? Is that, as manufacturers, and whether it's Lion Electric or Freightliner or who have you, one thing that is changing on the manufacturing side is that there is, over the past few years, there's a recognition that an understanding that it's not easy. So as an example, I never collaborated with a grant writing team as much as I do today. And so, at my company, we have a team of grant writers, for example, that will support a customer and write a grant on behalf of the customer. And then also on the back end, you need to have, a team of finance experts on the OEM side that can collaborate with outside finance companies that want to finance electric vehicles. So it's really important to have the resources internally, and those resources are a lot more than we've had to have in the past with an ICE vehicle. So and I think that's just an example of how their OEMs are stepping up to sort of close that gap to be able to better support customers.
Yeah. Sidney, is there anything that you're doing on the dealer side that sort of speaks to that? So where, maybe the way that you transact something or the way that you engage a customer is sort of evolving to meet the shifting market?
Yeah, so right now, it's just a truck deal is not as easy as it used to be. It's what everyone keeps telling me. There's a lot more involved, and it takes a lot longer to get the vehicle delivered to the customer. Sorry, something in my throat. But that is what I keep hearing across the board, is it used to be a lot easier, and it's a lot more intensive process and a lot of rework, a lot of communication, a lot of, doing stuff 2, 3, 4 times in order to get the vehicle to the customer. And that's, where you can either shine or fail. So that's the challenge we face.
That choked you up, like you're really sad.
I know, sorry.
It takes so long.
Yeah.
Kansas allergies. Yes. But
Now I am wondering, and again, if you can sort of remember back to the little dots, if there are any areas that you feel are taking maybe, I don't want to say taking up too much time, but maybe distracting from the evolution of the market. So let me just read out what the dots are. We have telematics, insurance, finance, inventory management, maintenance, parts, rentals, data, remarketing, accessories, fleet management, outfits, and warranties. Do you think any of those areas in particular are going to start to maybe diminish or go away? Like, and I know I just threw a lot at you, so let me just tell you what I'm thinking. So when I look at this, and I see warranties on there, the very first thing that happens is I go, man, I bet you everybody who's sitting in this audience is going to go, are you guys going to warranty all of this stuff? Like, you're coming at me again with all sorts of new stuff. I hope it's coming with an amazing warranty, because I really don't want the hassle, the burden of getting things fixed, especially with supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. Another area is this idea of accessories. So again, one of those things we rarely talk about, but knowing that, people have PTOs, PPO, they have all sorts of crazy outfits, and now we're coming at them with new vehicles that, the market has to respond to sort of address those things. So I'm just wondering, if dots aside, if there are any areas where you feel we have to sort of bolster what's going on in the market to deal with the evolution of the market.
Yes. How about when you say, instead of saying warranty, we talk about, maintenance contracts and sort of that whole holistic wraparound with the vehicle, right? That is, in my view, because of the complexity of the vehicle, is really, it used to be 20 years ago, you would sell a truck and an owner operator would be changing the oil in his driveway or in his garage, right? That goes away. And now we're talking about really, really complex vehicles with a whole heck of a lot going on. Technicians are almost engineers at the end of the day today. So I think we just need to change the way that we're thinking about. It's not just about warranty and responding when things break down. It's how do we predict maintenance? And Jill can probably talk a lot about that. And how do we have the right parts on hand to be able to support the vehicle and really predict the failures so that we can support the customer, resulting in less downtime. And I think, that's where my brain goes.
Yeah, I really agree with you, Christina. I think being able to predict the failure and to have a reliable supply chain, so that way when a fleet has a vehicle that's down and you go out to the vehicle, they have the parts on the truck because they already pretty much know these two things are what it could be. And the parts are available, they're on the truck, on the site, so you can put that vehicle back in service really quickly. And I know there's a lot of pushback a lot of times to share the data, and people are, what are you going to do with the data? But I think that's, companies need to be aware that sharing it is going to help the end consumer ultimately.
And then that loops back to that supplier partnership, right? Where, and I think we're seeing that a lot more. We're seeing that at least on the manufacturing side, with our telematics partners, for example, and, some of those other, in analytics, right? That data becomes invaluable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the market sees that value. And I was just about to talk about sort of vernacular and the way that we communicate the message. But I'll tell you, I was having a conversation yesterday about mobile maintenance, and one of the complaints was, hey, my guy shows up and he gets halfway through the truck and says, oh man, we don't have the parts to fix this. But now if we're talking telematics, if we're talking data transfer, we should be able to far more accurately predict what that truck needs. Do you guys agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that predictive analytics and predictive failure is something that we really need to look at as an industry, because things fail and they generally fail in a pattern. And predicting those patterns and being able to then be able to provide the proper parts at the right time is critical. And it's, having that truck down, it could be thousands of dollars a day for a $50 part.
Yeah, Sydney, you were talking about that earlier, right? When we were in the green room, how, or maybe it was the beginning of the conversation where one little part can take down a whole truck.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And that's the thing with all these EVs and everything. We don't quite know that maintenance schedule. And I think that's what is making a lot of fleets hesitant to jump both feet in, because the data is just not there yet. But it's coming. We just, it's gonna take some time.
Yeah, so what are we going to do about that? Like, I mean, as an industry, what are we going to do? Because it's a great point, right? We don't have a ton of data. There's not a ton of history yet. We're just starting to build and learn. But in the meantime, the customers sort of held hostage, because we have these mandates saying, hey, you got to do it, and yet we can't accurately predict what's going to happen to this thing. So what are you guys thinking are some of the remedies that could help us get through this sort of rough water period?
The good news is that we can do it in small bits and bites, right? And that's that's the approach that we're taking in terms of supporting customers, right? So you're taking a look. We met with a customer just this morning, actually, to say, look, you have 3,000 vehicles in your fleet, but you need a roadmap, right? Help the customer put a roadmap together. You're not going to start. Sorry, Sidney, you're not going to start in Kansas, right? You're going to start with the feasibility, right? So New York City, LA, great markets. Let's look at your lanes in those areas, right? So I think it's really all about feasibility, and then also looking at the ability to support that customer. Sydney's dealership in Kansas City wouldn't be able to support a customer in Los Angeles, for example. So, but if Sydney's dealer group had a location in LA, they would start with that dealership in LA, right? So I think it's all about feasibility, and it's about starting in the markets that can support that customer, because it's all about support, and it's not just dropping a vehicle and saying see you later. It's putting that vehicle in the right market and then holding that customer's hand, and making sure that they have a good launch, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's where the dealer network really comes in, and that's when the customer needs to be able to rely on the OEM for, what they need for that support, and also that warranty of the vehicle, because they're helping the OEM as much as the OEM's helping them.
Yeah. Something else that was really interesting. So everything that you guys said is amazing, of course, but something else that was interesting was, Christina, when you were talking about maintenance contracts versus warranty, we're talking, and Joe was talking about predictive analysis to help supply chain be able to effectively get the parts to the market. It's almost like we need to reconfigure how we talk about things, and subsequently rethink about who are the entities that need to come together to make this thing happen more effectively. What are your thoughts on that as a group again?
Yeah, it's the full ecosystem, right? So you've got to bring the right partners to the table, the finance side, the maintenance side. And by the way, it may not just be your dealer network that you're relying upon for those partnerships. We're seeing new business models that are popping up quite frankly, that I've not seen in my time in the industry. Truck as a service, vehicle as a service is one that comes to mind. And I'll tell you, the companies that are coming to the table, they're super, super smart. They get it, right? It's about, how do you make it feasible? Well, you can make it feasible by having a vehicle on the ground, by having a maintenance contract, and the charging, right? All in one, and then for one payment. I mean, that really is, in my view, something that's new, where you can go. I was just, I was at a location in, actually near LAX airport the other day, and they have it set up so that you can, you know, go pick up your vehicle. You leave your car, driver goes and picks up his truck. It's charged up, it's ready to go, it's maintained, and at the end of his route, he drops it off, they plug it in for him, and it's ready the next day. Boom, mind blowing, but a completely different way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, so I'm going to leverage that because, again, great thought. And I remember as a group in our preamble, we talked a little about this idea of the little customer. So when I think of vehicle as a service, truck as a service, charging as a service, fantastic ideas, right? They solve a lot of issues really quickly as far as equipment, charging, infrastructure, financing, all that stuff gets solved. But those are fundamentally sort of big fleet solutions, right? Like you have a large fleet that it helps displace and they take care of it, or you've got a good amount of capital, you're well resourced and you can afford to do it. What happens to the little guy? Like we had talked about leaving the little guy behind because that's maybe they only have like 3 trucks or 10 trucks or 5, and that doesn't fit their business model. How do we make sure that we're keeping the little guy in the loop and he doesn't get, spit out the back and it's just the big fleets taking over?
Wow, that's such a great question. And that's one that, I think there's a lot of people working really hard to try to figure out how to bring the small fleet and owner operators along. They still represent a huge part of the whole market, right? There are a lot of programs, for example, that really are geared towards disadvantaged communities, small fleet owner operators. The challenge is that the technology has really outpaced the owner operator. So, for example, I love LA because LA has a congestion problem, and the other thing that they have is the ports, for example, is primarily a large number of owner operators that have used equipment for a very long time. Those folks have to electrify. The challenge for that demographic of customer is that that owner operator probably has a parking space that he parks his truck. He may not own his home. He may be a renter. So what do you do about infrastructure, right? What are the types of things that we can put together to bring those folks along? And it may be that they need to have, for example, a subscription, right, for charging. So again, a completely new way of thinking. Could be that they need to have a maintenance contract with an infrastructure provider for his vehicle, right? And so we're a vehicle as a service company that maybe offers that charging and maintenance. That might be a solution for him.
Yeah, so great. Sidney, I wonder if on your end, and I'm not trying to pigeonhole Kansas City at all.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But being on the coast, let's be honest, like that's when we think of the, middle of the country, you always think, oh, it's sort of rural and, they're not, we're sort of dragging them along or they're being forced to follow the big centers. But I don't believe that. So tell me what's happening in where you are. Like, how are you sort of facilitating moving forward for smaller fleets?
Yeah, so for the smaller fleets, I think a lot of them we had a few that jumped into electrification, like both feet first. They got 1 or 2 vehicles and they're studying that thing very thoroughly to ensure that once they do invest further, that they, have made the right choice. But we also see a lot of people who are holding off because, they are not required yet to jump into that electrification. So, they're kind of waiting to see what the bigger fleets do, I would say.
Yeah, and we do see that here too, where, we'll talk to fleets and they'll say like things like, oh, we're just waiting to see what Walmart does. So they it's a real thing where they go, like they lead the market and they're going to dictate the market.
Yeah, I think all the smaller fleets that have adopted have kind of done it to check the box right now to say, hey, we do have an electric vehicle, but we're, they're holding off until they absolutely have to.
Yeah. And to be honest, it's not even just the smaller centers. I mean, I was talking to a transportation manager, and she's in Atlanta, like she's in Georgia, like near the city, and they've got a fleet of 150 vehicles. And her response was, "Yeah, we're really interested in electrifying, and we've got a bunch of test vehicles on board, but we physically don't see chargers, and we're not mandated to meet the same sort of ZEV guidelines as the other states. So why would we? Like, we're just going to wait to see what happens." And
Yeah.
it's fascinating because they're in a major city center.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's not much for grants and funding in some of those states that really don't have that regulation to push them in, right? Yeah, so it's really, you have to really look at, especially for the big fleets that have, DCs in every state, you really have to do a lot of planning, and put a roadmap together. That's the best way to do it, is to go, okay, what am I going to do in New York, and when does Washington State come into play, and
Yeah.
how far down the road and is Louisiana and Alabama? It's coming, just not as quickly, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Jill, I'm going to put you on the spot, or no, let me rephrase that to make
Yeah.
it more amenable. Like, I'm going to put the spotlight on you and ask you, you've got great oversight because you know what's going on in the market, and yet you're dealing with sort of OEs and vendors and suppliers. And we're talking about sort of reconfiguring, again, the dots, like who's holding hands with whom. Can you talk a little bit about any ideas or thoughts that you have of partnerships that would make sense to help move it along so that people are more engaged at the customer level?
I mean, when you're talking, Eric,
No,
go
go
ahead and
ahead.
rephrase it. Rephrase
Oh,
it. So yeah.
you've got great vision and oversight on who's doing what, and yet everything that we're talking about as a group is sort of making this more attractive to the end user, like making it simpler, making it easier to do. What's your point of view on how you might do that, or how we might do it?
I just think like more connectivity, more like when you're talking about charging as a service and you're talking about trucks as a service and you're talking about that, having that available and some centralized place where they can go and see what's available. And I think a lot of it is they don't know what the regulation is in their state. Like the information isn't like as readily available and widely distributed as you would think it was. So I think places where smaller operators can come and get that information and have access to a lot of the same charging structure that the bigger fleets do. I know out here in California, we have a lot of hydrogen fleets, and the hydrogen stations are set up on one side's a commercial side and one side is a not commercial side. Is more of a, to have things like that are more readily available to the smaller operators and ways for them to figure out what is available and do they have access and how do we give them access?
So you're talking about bums and seats, basically, like let them go and experience it and see how it works, and maybe that's a catalyst to adoption. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. Me, myself, I'm a big hydrogen proponent. I've owned 2 hydrogen cars. We have infrastructure here in California, and some smaller fleets and all of our buses around here run on hydrogen. So,
Well, I just finished working on a hydrogen Class 8. So if you're looking for one, I know where you can get one.
nice.
I want to throw this question to both Christina and Sidney then. So taking Jill's thought about sort of letting people experience these things before they buy, is that, like, tell me how close to reality we are in doing that, because it's a great idea, but it's not easy to implement. So how close are we?
I would say that's where you really want to lean on the rental companies, and you get an electric vehicle for a day for lighter duty stuff, and try it out and see how it works within your fleet. And that's how a lot of big customers have gotten, have tried other OEM products before. So I would say rent.
At your dealership, like, do you guys have passenger also? And let's say someone wants a Lightning, they can rent it for a day and try it.
Yeah, we could set someone up with a demo. We also work with a lot of rental companies that we will, say, hey, reach out to these people and they'll be able to help you. And it's a win-win. So it's a try before you buy type deal.
Yeah. Christina, what are your thoughts on this? How close are we?
I think it's better for the pass car industry and smaller classes of vehicles. Much more challenging as you get to the larger classes, class 5 through 8, for example. We're not seeing the big FMCs of the world stepping up to jump into the space, which traditionally has helped to get those butts in the seats, so to speak, to try the vehicles. So we're seeing probably much more so on the OEM side, where the OEMs are really having to step up to close that gap, working with dealer partners to put our class of vehicles into rental fleets, into dealer rental fleets, right? The other thing that you're seeing a lot more of, and you probably see it on LinkedIn all the time, which is ride and drives. So that's a fairly new phenomenon that we're seeing in the commercial vehicle industry, where you'll have an OEM, for example, that will rent out a motor speedway for a day, and then you bring together some of the CARB air districts and some of the other stakeholders, and everybody gets into the vehicle and takes it on a test lap. So that's fairly new. Also bringing vehicles to a customer location so that you can bring along not just the folks that are responsible for purchasing, but how about the drivers getting inside and getting into either an electric or hydrogen vehicle, for example, and saying, hey, this isn't a big green-eyed monster, right? There's a lot of benefits for you as a driver. So really important.
I like the pun, the green monster.
That's right.
So question for the audience again. I'm just curious if anybody's doing anything like that, where the customer gets to experience something or try something that they haven't done before, and you're facilitating that. I'm sort of curious about that. Now, something else that I want to talk about, because on my other screen, I'm looking at our bubbles, and you guys have just sort of reminded me or enlightened me that there's something missing on this ecosystem, which is there's nothing here to talk about the regs. So Jill, you had just talked about that, where people need to educate themselves to know what it is that they need to do before they go and try this stuff. And I was just on a panel at Work Truck Week, and it was about CARB regulations. And we were pretty close to an uprising, I gotta say. There's a lot of people in the audience who are just like, torches and pitchforks saying, what's going on? And wouldn't blame them for a minute, because it's very convoluted. There's a lot of stuff to understand. But there's no bubble up here that says that's around education. So let's just talk really quickly as a group about that. Like, how do we go about educating, whether it be an upfitter or a dealer or an end user, to get them up to speed effectively? Because they need that.
I mean, they do need that. I know that without that education, there's going to be the fear to adopt electric if you're using a diesel fleet or something of that sort, especially if you're talking about hydrogen. Like, people have a big issues about that. When I first bought my vehicle, I had trouble getting it insured because the insurance companies didn't know. The agent literally told me, what if it blows up? I'm like, what if it blows up? So I think education is a big, how the vehicles work, what grants, like Lion has grant writers, that's amazing. So be able to help them to understand the regulations and help them to realize what's out there to help them to convert their fleets to something that is more, closer to zero emissions.
Mm-hmm. Sidney, are you doing anything on your end, or as an entity, how do you guys go about educating the customer on what's possible, what's available, new things that are coming?
Yeah, we just share anything and everything we get because everything is so new at this point that, we're learning at the same time as the customer to an extent. So, we're learning together. We have good partners in the OEMs that we work with and the upfitters to make sure that we're all on the same page, same book. But yeah, it's just a continuous learning process, and any information is good information. So
Yeah.
just, you got to invest in taking the time too.
And I
Yeah.
think the problem is the smaller operators, they're working in their business. They're
Yeah.
not in a position to work on their business. So having the time to really dig in and educate themselves is difficult. So I think events like this and different events that are pointed toward that are important for them to be able to take the time to participate so they can learn.
Yeah. Cindy, what would help you as, part of a dealer or a dealer group even to, lift your own awareness and intelligence around all these things that are happening? Because again, there is a lot. What do you think would be a great tool for you?
I think just talking to our upfitters, because they're really on the front lines of, all these commercial vehicles, they know the insides and the outsides, and how to make it work. So I really lean on that.
Yeah, right. Jill or Christina, I'm sorry. Did you have any thoughts on the education piece?
Yeah, and again, looking at it through the lens of an OEM, I think every OEM right now understands that we need to be subject matter experts on a lot of the topics of regulation. For example, just looking backwards in time to some of the different regulations that the industry has gone through. I've never collaborated so closely with our government relations folks, for example, as I have in the past 5 years of really making sure that as an OEM, that we are talking to the right people at the highest levels of government, for example, to make sure, as a commercial vehicle industry, that our customers' voices are heard through the manufacturing side of the business. And let's not even get into the fact that it's an election year, right? So that really throws another wrench into what's happening in the industry. So education, I think, if we can take some leadership as industry leaders to be able to educate people and pull along, the finance folks, the insurance folks, and so that they know where to go for information too.
Yeah, that's great. Like it's such great thinking. I'll tell you, every single one of these conferences that I attend or panelist on, whatever it might be, whenever there are breakout sessions on anything, they're always packed. Like people really do have a thirst for that knowledge and information. And it's just the question is, are there effective ways and even potentially more effective ways than just conferences of getting the information out there? A lot of times we hear word of mouth is a big thing, like talking to peers, watching what's going on in the market. That's how people are learning. So, sorry, Joe.
How about getting in front of people and eyeball to eyeball? Like, where's that anymore, right? I find that to be super effective of just making sure that I'm talking to the right people that are, for example, we see a lot more sustainability folks. We never talked about sustainability people 10 years ago, right? So getting in front of those folks, and they can really help push some things along and get in front of the right people.
Right. Now we have about 56 seconds left. So with that, I think what I'm going to ask you is for each one from each of you, if there's one area where you feel like you're going to concentrate, like if there's one dot that you're going to concentrate on in, let's say, the next 6 to 12 months, where do you think you're going to put your focus?
Personally, I think sustainability.
Okay, so elaborate a little bit.
Yeah.
What's the motivation there, Joe?
I mean, I live in California. We have a lot of electric vehicles. I think, moving forward, there's a lot of resistance to zero emission vehicles, but really having panels and talking about it and educating people on the advantages and as the industry evolves and creating solutions for those pain points that adopting the new technology is, creating.
Yeah. Sydney, what about you?
I would say mine would be in telematics and just getting to know more, so we can better serve our customers and our fleet. So they have all that data is already there. And so we can find out a way to use it.
Right. Christina, what are you thinking?
Maintenance, supporting that customer when that vehicle is delivered is probably, the biggest challenge that I see in the industry. It needs a lot of support. Not every dealer is set up to do it. So.
Perfect. Well, you guys have clearly been a dream team panel. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to do this, and for everybody in the audience who took the time to listen and hopefully learn some new perspectives. So thank you all, and I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all.